I think we all want the best, whatever our definition of that might be. The best car, whatever that is to you. The best job, ditto. The best life, different for all of us again. What's not up for debate is which is the best DAC from Geshelli Labs. It's clearly the Dayzee. This video isn't about the Dayzee though. You know something else that's probably the best in class and would be very hard to debate? The Sparkos Labs SS2590 op amps. They're a large part of what separates the Dayzee DAC from its competition, and sadly, they don't fit in the J2S, which is the lower level DAC from Geshelli Labs, but they do fit in the new J3 DAC. The J3 DAC was built on a couple of needs. In many ways, it's the same DAC as the J2S that came before it, and that's a very good thing. It's got a pretty simple design that helps to keep the cost down, especially if you're happy to go with Perspex front and backs in an extruded aluminium case, but you can also upspec it with some gorgeous wooden casework too. Like the J2S, the J3 also uses the AK4499EX DAC chip, and will also support op-amp rolling for those who want to tweak the sound and potentially upgrade the sound depending on which op-amps you choose. Where things differ though, is that the J3 DAC has a different board layout, and that's in no small part to expand the distance between the op-amp sockets to allow space to fit the monstrous SS2590 op-amps from Sparkos Labs into the J3. The 2590s are a mono op-amp, but you can buy them straight from Sparkos Labs or via Geshelli if you're buying one of their DACs, in a system where they're stacked together with two 2590s on top of an 8-pin adapter. And so knowing that the Dayzee uses the same AK4499EX DAC chip, albeit it uses two of them, and that also both of these DACs, being the J3 and the Dayzee, can run 2590 op-amps, does that mean that the J3 is just a mini Dayzee that sounds just as good? Sadly no, things are a little bit more complicated. Let me explain. The J3 starts at a price of $530 US, and that makes it a lower mid-price DAC in the audiophile market. At that price, you're not getting a USB card, that's an extra $50 US. You're getting the basic aluminium and Perspex casing, which actually has its own benefits in my opinion. It also has some good OPA 1656 op amps, but they are quite far away from the performance of options like the Burson V7 Vivid or the Sparkos 2590s. And so you can spec those different op amps in for a bit more money. To cut to the chase, if you want a fully spec'd J3 DAC, excluding any wooden casework, just sticking with the aluminium and Perspex, you're looking at around about an $840 US DAC. That's the J3 with premium op amps like the Burson V7 Vivids or the Sparkos 2590s and the USB card. At that price, we're slightly past the cost of the Schiit Bifrost 2, and so the J3 had better be good. Before I tell you if it is though, let me quickly cover off what the other difference is between the J2 and the J3, and that is that the J3 brings a bit of extra refinement and class with the new selector buttons here. Gone are the old exposed black switches and red LEDs, and in their place are some much nicer looking illuminated silver press buttons. You can spec these to have red, blue, green or white lights, and I believe you can even ask them to not be illuminated at all if you want to go for more of a stealth look. But that would require an email to the team, it's not an option on the site. And speaking of options on the site, I did notice on the website that there is no option for the 2590s as standard in the J3, so you're probably going to have to email them about costs and getting those installed as well. But I can confirm that the J3 is definitely designed to fit 3 2590s in that stacked 8-pin adapter system. And so with that in mind, let's start talking about sound by not talking about sound. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to talk about the sound of the J3 with the stock OPA 1656 op amps in it. The reason for that is if you're going to run the J3 with the stock OPA 1656 op amps, maybe before you get around to upgrading them, the sound of the J3 is going to be very similar to the sound from the J2S. And so I'll link you to my review of the J2 and the J2S range at the end of this video, because in that video I've already covered all the conversation around what the benefits are of upgrading the op amps, what the stock sounds like versus the upgraded sound. It's all already in that video. Instead, what we're going to do is focus our time on talking about the J3 with the V7 Vivids from Burson and then with the 2590s from Sparkos. In other words, should you bother going for the 2590s, which is going to be a custom order, it's going to be an email back and forth, or are the V7 Vivids in the J3 just as good? Well, to put you out of your misery straight away, the Sparkos 2590s do everything that the V7 Vivids do, only better. The overall sound of the J3 with either of those premium op amps installed is one that's resolving, it's detailed, but it's smooth and it's refined. Every nuance, detail and texture is available to you, but it has a richness and refinement to its sound that makes it far more enjoyable than any other Delta Sigma chip-based DAC that I've tried at the price. Again, if you're not upgrading the op amps in the J3, that doesn't hold true, and the J3 just slips back amongst the pack as a very nice, but same as everything else DAC. It's when you install the V7 Vivids or the 2590s that it really becomes exceptional. And then where the 2590s show their benefits over and above the V7 Vivids is that they deliver everything I've described already with an extra layer again of transparency, nuance and resolution. Curiously, the V7 Vivids actually come across out of those two op amp setups as the slightly leaner and drier sound. And that makes the 2590s a smoother listen, but you shouldn't be tricked into thinking that that means they're less resolving. If anything, they're more detailed and more transparent or resolving by a noticeable margin. In other words, if you can get the 2590s in the J3, you absolutely should, but if you can't, the V7 Vivids are going to have you smiling wide and listening long. And on that note, I mentioned the Schiit Bifrost 2 earlier. It's been my go-to recommendation for a DAC anywhere below $1,000 US, probably even a little bit higher than that, ever since I first heard the Bifrost 2. It then got better with the Bifrost 2/64 upgrade a couple of years ago, and so for $799 US or $829 US, depending on the color you choose, it seems to offer some very strong competition for the J3. Or does it? Comparing the Bifrost 2 to the J3 running the Burson V7 Vivids is a really tight battle. The J3 flips the script a little bit on the Bifrost 2's reputation as being a smoother, warmer sounding DAC. But that said, both deliver equivalent detail, resolution, clarity, all the stuff that you want. They also both deliver a tonality and sense of refinement that's going to be very difficult not to enjoy. And with the V7 Vivids in the J3, I would actually say that the difference between them is going to come down to a preferential choice. I think they're both so close in performance that it's going to be a question of whether you like the slightly leaner sound from the Bifrost 2, and we're talking very, very slight, or the slightly richer, smoother sound from the J3. With the 2590s in the J3, not so much. Now the J3 actually doubles down on being the richer, smoother sounding DAC, but it also increases the detail and nuance that you can hear. On Decadence Dance, Nuno Betancourt's guitar from the J3 sounds meaty and solid, but it also has all the energy and attack you're going to want. The J3 is not a smooth or slow sounding DAC in any guise. It's crisp, clean and detailed, but super refined. In other words, the J3 is a spectacularly good DAC at the price, and with a set of 2590s installed as the op amps, I think it's probably the best DAC you can buy, short of something like a Chord Cutis or a similarly priced option. Either way, you're going to be doubling the cost of the J3 and the 2590s to get anywhere close to beating it. And so that brings us back around to Geshelli Labs' own Dayzee DAC. How close can a full-fat J3 with 3 2590s installed get to a full-fat Dayzee with its 8 2590s and a pair of AK4499 DAC chips? Can you just buy the full-fat J3 and get 99% of the performance of the twice the price Dayzee? Listening to B here as I switched back and forth between these two, the Dayzee consistently offered a more open and spacious presentation. There's simply no way that the J3 can catch up to the dual mono design of the Dayzee DAC. What the Dayzee's more intricate design and circuit layout is delivering is more space around every sound, and therefore a greater sense of space in the overall soundstage, despite the soundstage actually getting no larger. In other words, the maximum soundstage width and depth is the same between the J3 and the Dayzee to my ears. And yet what's different is the sense of space around each of the individual sounds. Somehow everything feels a bit closer together and a bit less separated from the J3. It's a little bit like the borders of each sound are less clearly defined and they bleed together ever so slightly from the J3. And please don't hear that as a knock on the J3. It's a wonderful DAC. Remember, I just said it's the best DAC for its price and probably for up to twice its price. But you are getting what you're paying for with the Dayzee. And before the linear power supply brigade start ranting in the comments about how the J3 would be just as good as the Dayzee if I used a linear power supply with it, the J3 performs just as well as any other Geshelli DAC when you replace the wall wart with a linear power supply, which is to say that they improve by another layer of performance, but they don't leap to another performance tier. Going from the J3's provided wall wart power supply to a high quality 12-volt linear power supply delivers a very similar improvement to the one I described going from the V7 Vivid op amps to the 2590 op amps. A little more detail, nuance, space around the sounds, and a touch more refinement overall. The sound is obviously better, but by an incremental step. For perspective, the J3 running the 2590 op amps and a linear power supply can't catch the Dayzee running a wall wart and the V7 Vivid op amps. And keep in mind that a quality linear power supply costs about as much as a full set of premium op amps for the J3, and so consider carefully whether you want to go out and spend that money on a power supply or put it towards a higher spec DAC like the Dayzee in the first place. And while we're talking tweaks and optimizations, it's worth noting that the various digital inputs on the J3 DAC are all essentially interchangeable. And what I mean by that is they're all excellent to the point that assuming that your upstream source is of the same quality level, then whether you use USB, optical or coaxial, if the source quality is the same, what you're going to enjoy from the DAC is basically the same too, accounting for slight variations between transmission protocols and cable types. And so if you want the best DAC on the market for under $1,500, maybe even more, then I'll put a link down below through to the J3 page because that's it, that's the one. If though you want a better understanding of the various options you can choose, such as the USB board, the various op amp choices, etc., then check out this video up here where I went through the full range in the J2 and the J2S DACs, talking about what the upgrades did, what you might want to choose, etc. Everything that I've said in that video applies 100% to the J3 as well. And for now, I want to say a huge thanks to channel members, to channel Patreon members, and to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.